All right. Welcome everyone to our CodeX group meeting. It is again Thursday, 1:30 Pacific time, and that's when we invite you all to join us for a conversation on cutting-edge legal tech and legal innovation topics. We have two amazing people here with us today. Steve West, the CEO of Hence, which provides solutions to align legal work with business strategy. And we have Roberto Peña from the Supreme Court of Mexico, and who will be introducing us to the Sor Juana project. And so, as always, we have an hour, which gives everyone, each presentation, 30 minutes. But I asked the presenters to keep their remarks to 15 minutes and leave the rest for conversation with the group. So I will have to, I have a conflict at 2 o'clock, but Megan will take over then. And if you all in the group, you have any updates to share, please use the chat function. And then, once you have questions after the initial remarks of our presenters, you can use the chat function or just unmute yourself. So with that, Sean is currently in the UK, although he's normally out here in California. And so since it's already late there, he will start us off. And over to you, Sean.
Cool. Hey everyone. Let me just make sure. Let me just share the right thing. Hey everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Sean West. I'm one of the co-founders of Hence. Steve Heitkamp, my other co-founder, will be on the line as well. I'm going to make this big so you don't have to squint. Presumably everybody can see my opening slide. I'm going to talk today about building legal threat management, legal threat detection systems, which is what we've been focusing on at Hence. Just a second about Hence. So we've got an amazing team of engineers, largely based in Rwanda, that have been building out our system over the last nearly 5 years, and the system does all sorts of different things to manage legal risks for companies. I'm going to set the scene a little bit before I get into what we actually do. So. If we take a look out at the world, and I spent about almost 20 years as a geopolitical expert. The world is crazy right now. The world is on fire. Every day feels like it's a fire drill. There's risks coming from everywhere because politics is unstable. I don't have to remind all of you dialing in the US that there's an election in a couple of weeks. And not only can we not rule out the potential to not know who the president is after the election, we can't rule out the potential for violence after the election. So that's a US example, but there's missiles flying around the world. There's live wars going on. It's a bit of a crazy world. So we've got a lot of geopolitical volatility at a time when we have new technologies that are being brought to the market extremely fast and that have game-changing uses, in particular from a productivity and efficiency point of view, dropping the cost of traditional products and services like legal services down to very cheap, or at least they have the promise to do that. And we have a backdrop where there really is a rule of law recession, a decline in the power of international law, a decline in the power of national law that we're living through. And all of that together equals the fact that we're living with new rules of business. Now, as the cost of legal action decreases, the motivation to act is increasing. And Steve and I wrote a piece that was in Harvard Business Review about 2 weeks ago, arguing that we need to, as company leaders, we need to prepare for a world where legal attacks are as cheap as cyber attacks, and the nature of legal risk starts to look more like cyber risk. So board meetings no longer look like legal challenges that are above a material threshold being elevated to the board, but the aggregation of smaller level attacks now pose threats in aggregate, and we need to take lessons from cybersecurity and how to deal with that. So a little bit of level setting on where we are from a geopolitical point of view. There was a magical time called globalization where the world was converging, and in fact, companies and states, countries were aligned with moving towards a single set of rules from an efficiency point of view. Companies companies saw it as kind of an unendless march towards convergence that would make it easier to be a multinational company. Countries saw it as a way to lift people out of poverty. But of course, from that time period of the fall of the Berlin Wall till the fall of Bear Stearns, a lot of wealth was created, and then a whole lot of fragmentation happened after. The financial crisis shook up conceptions about the primacy of Western democratic capitalism. We had refugee crises that changed the politics that brought us politics of populism and nationalism, combined with the fact that people felt poor. U.S. and China technological Cold War that really is resulting in the building of walls between countries and new enemies and more ambitious geopolitical attacks like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We're living with all of this, right? And every day we wake up to different headlines of this. At an international level, international institutions may not be crumbling like in the picture, which, my wife worked for the UN for a long time, so I'm a fan of the UN. But the idea that the UN would resolve the conflict in the Middle East or Russia, Ukraine today doesn't seem very appropriate given the composition of the Security Council. The idea that borders mean something, that we can rely on rule of law and borders no longer means something. The idea that that all parties to some of the nastiest conflicts alive today care about rules of war really is hard to believe. We have Vladimir Putin, who's been indicted by the ICC, visiting Mongolia, which signed the Rome Statute. They refused to arrest him. We have Netanyahu, who's been indicted by the ICC, visiting the U.S., which at one point had signed the ICC, addressing Congress and receiving a standing ovation from some. So, the point here is not to get political about it, but to say that the rules that we used to operate under no longer matter. We're seeing it at a national level where we have a weaponization of the law. We see that in the elections where really the Supreme Court's been refereeing this election all along from over a year ago about whether Trump could run to how far does presidential immunity extend. But we also see it with traditional political maneuvers that come from a deadlock Congress, where federal agencies like the FTC reinterpret their mandate and decide that they'll do what they want and see if the courts stop them. We see political actors going to single judge districts at the federal circuit in the U.S. to get national laws, injunctions against national laws, just from one judge. And we see a raft of conflicting legislation, and increasingly it's hard for companies to know that they're actually following the rules everywhere, even if they want to, because the rules are conflictual. At the same time, AI is bringing down the price of legal to the point where it is not inconceivable that it will be free to not just generate mock lawsuits like many people will show you LLMs doing, but to eventually have those systems be refined and filed and accepted. And we also will see adjudication and other judging processes become automated, reducing the cost of using those facilities. So as the cost of legal goes down, the willingness of people to use legal to attack goes up, and we're starting to see this. So this is one legal attack that happened earlier this year. The Treasury Department released a rule on crypto brokering that a group of crypto lawyer hacktivists did not like. So they released a bot that said, click a few buttons and you can submit as many comments as you'd like to the Treasury Department about it. The average federal rule receives 3 comments. This rule got 120,000 and Treasury was left to deal with it. Now imagine the same type of thing happening with claims against your company. And indeed, that's been happening in the arbitration space. For instance, companies have been kind of favoring arbitration clauses because they believe that it would withstand, it would obviate class action lawsuits. But we've seen a raft of mass arbitrations being filed where DoorDash had 5,000 arbitrations filed against it in one day with a law firm that also used tech support to do that. And the bill for that arbitration would have been $15 million had they done it. And you can see some other examples of that as well. So tech enabling these kind of mass attacks against companies starts to look a bit like cyber risk. And we have the ability, and if this were an access to justice conversation, I would talk about how this can actually equip us all to defend ourselves better in court where we would otherwise represent ourselves or in pre-litigation. But if we're thinking about it from a risk perspective, it's fairly dangerous. And I'll give the example. I was rear-ended by a driver who took responsibility at the scene. I was diagnosed with a concussion. I sent my medical documentation to that person's insurance company, and they wrote me a letter back saying, we've determined you had no injury. Of course, I had been injured and it was documented, but I didn't want to call up 1-800-lawyers or whatever billboard I had seen. So I thought, you know what, let's go find an AI personal injury lawyer. And indeed, in the state of Utah, Zaf Legal, which is a personal injury firm, has an AI bot that will generate a demand letter for you, if you'd like. And so instead of folding and accepting the $600 they wanted to give me, which, like, I live in America, the medical bill is 10 times that, I'm fighting, right? I generated a demand letter. I generated a mock complaint in ChatGPT and told them I would potentially file it. And I think even if those are not great legal strategies today, they will get better and better, and they will be more and more enticing. And companies will have to deal with the fact that instead of folding, people are fighting. The types of people who may fight against an organization could be a competitor who uses AI to figure out how to file hundreds or thousands of frivolous IP claims or trade secrets claims against you in foreign jurisdictions where they have the upper hand in court. It could be disgruntled employees, or it could be would-be employees who use AI to understand their contracts and then to auto-generate analysis that they share with the world about how your contracts are lopsided and unfair. It could be a customer who walks into your coffee shop and feels discriminated against, except instead of just recording it on video, they can push a button that generates a complaint that can be filed. Or it could be the government using AI to catch you in enforcement every minute of every day because it is cheaper for them to do perfect monitoring in the future. So, companies need to defend themselves against those threats if they want to outperform, and those that don't will probably die. I mean, that is really our perspective, that if you cannot rise to this occasion, your business will be damaged in a way that competitors who do will not suffer. So how do you do that? Right? There's threats from everywhere. So we need to shift to an all hazards mindset when we think about legal. This is about lawsuits being filed about many things in many places, and we will see the cadence of it tick up. But once it turns into a flood, it will be hard to stop. So we need to shift our mindset. If we think about parallels to cybersecurity, we need to get smarter about where our assets are and what our footprint actually is. We need to assess our vulnerabilities in an ongoing way and potentially pool vulnerabilities. Well, today it's hard to imagine a whole group of general counsel sitting down talking about the lawsuits being filed against them to seek commonality. In the future, there may be a role for pooling of legal vulnerabilities. There will be a role for insurance to play in mitigating that as well, and for new insurance products to be innovated. For today, what Hens is trying to do to help companies prepare for this is to take our existing matter management and litigation management system and extend it upstream in the risk channel to threat identification. So our system will not only understand what is going on in the world by digesting political events, understanding legal consequences of political events, as you can see an example there citing regulatory uncertainty in the system, but it will also assess the vulnerabilities of companies and make sure what they are seeing is actually relevant to that person as a user or that company. The perspective of a law firm who wants to alert their clients to risk is different than the perspective of a company that's trying to manage that risk. And so we're deploying a system that has a whole host of actions you can take and a whole host of analysis you can do, because ultimately, if you can't actually take actions to mitigate the risk, then the knowledge is not that useful. So what we need to provide you is the ability to investigate the risk, to see it in your context, but also to generate the tasks and artifacts that you're expected to generate as a senior executive. So to auto-generate a board memo that can be edited, right, by you before you send it to the board, that puts in context the legal risks that you would face. Or if you're a law firm, to auto-generate those client alerts about the risks that your clients are facing. And ultimately realize that this is dynamic, and so collaboration is key. This new world of legal risk doesn't just stay in legal. These are risks that are going to hit HR, they're going to hit the tech stack, they're going to hit all forms of the business. So we've built a system that makes it seamless to share and collaborate on these matters outside of the legal system, outside of the legal management system within the organization. So That's all I wanted to present. I think I did that in about 15 minutes. I'm happy for questions. I'm sharing with you two QR codes or two links here. One of them on the right is the product waitlist. So if this product is interesting to you, please feel free to register your interest. The other is I write a weekly update on the intersection of geopolitics, law, and tech. That's read by north of 1,000 GCs and law firm partners. If anybody would like, it's free. It's on Substack. You're welcome to sign up. And I talk about a lot of these issues on a weekly basis. And thanks everyone for your time and attention.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sean. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, what sort of the specific initial use cases that you're working on and your specific solution to that.
Sure. Well, let me give my co-founder Steve some airtime here since you've heard a lot from me. Steve, are you on and able to jump in?
Yes, I am. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a lot of different use cases. I think some of the most common ones that come up are in-house legal counsel in particular at companies that have global dependencies. So ones that may have employees, customers, operations in different locations throughout the world that often have a kind of expectation to understand what's going on in those places. So you could think of like a head of legal for LATAM or something like that at a large company, which includes a whole host of countries that they may be trying to track and understand what's kind of happening geopolitically, and then what are some of the potential legal risks we need to be considering and mitigating against before they kind of show up at our doorstep in a lawsuit or a government action. And so a lot of that is taking that individual, say, who has that responsibility, coming into Hence, and then creating kind of simple monitors or complicated monitors so they can monitor the countries of interest or border countries, particular actors, whether that's government agencies or individual political actors or legal actors, and or combinations of those things, and including things like topics or risk concepts. So you can imagine I wanted to monitor for any comments from certain government institutions within Colombia as it relates to AI bias in data or something like that. And so what we would be doing is creating this customized sense of what are things that are happening in the world that match with the types of things you care about, and then surfacing those in a way in which that user can effectively start to triage it the way you might with a cyber risk, where you get low, medium, high priority risks of different areas, and you can then come into that, get context about the event that is triggering the risk, context about the actors involved, the countries, to get you a kind of broader sense of what's going on, to do a very quick kind of assessment that today might take a lot of time to compile all of that information and context, and then use that to start to kind of take the next set of actions. So that may be kickstarting a kind of full mitigation process, or it may be just writing a quick memo out to some stakeholders that might be interested, with a few comments in a kind of email that you draft up and say, hey, you've probably seen the news that this is going on. We've done a quick assessment of some of the potential implications. Here's some things we think you should think about as you move forward in the next few weeks. And capturing all of that as kind of data about not just the risk coming in, but the actions you're taking against that, so you can get smarter, so that the system can get smarter over time to better understand kind of what matters to you, what risks are you mitigating, what are the things you care about, in order to kind of tune what's coming your way every day.
And how much of your solution is, sort of a human consulting versus a ready to go platform slash product? Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think it's the vast majority of it is productized. So we have kind of AI embedded throughout this process in order to do summarization, entity extraction, kind of doing contextual awareness and things like that of lots of different pieces of information. We do have kind of humans in the loop for vetting certain things, for validating certain concepts. But the process that Sean showed some screenshots, like that's on a rolling basis. We're constantly doing that, and have profiles where the information is coming in every few hours and processing and being summarized automatically, and taking kind of baseline information that you might be trying to collect about, country stability, recent events that are potentially the context around this, in summarizing that and then using that to surface to people. So it's very automated in that sense. We don't have we have expertise behind the board, and we're checking and kind of looking at logic and things like that. But on a day-to-day basis, this is all happening kind of within the system.
Mhm. Yeah, so in a sense, it reminds me a little bit of these platforms that were using sort of machine learning and NLP to, sort of monitor what's going on out in the world of, regulation, right? So that's more for the, government affairs folks at large companies to understand, what's coming down the pike. And it's more to like, for, sort of compliance. But what I think you're doing is sort of you're going broader than just, laws and regulations that are being developed in different regions, but also looking into sort of broader threats. And I suppose you're getting, kind of your customers will sort of help you also understand, the kinds of threats that are out there, but you probably have also kind of taxonomy of threats that you see all the time nowadays. And, I think Sean gave us a good kind of overview of all these. I thought, one of the comments was like, yeah, so this AI litigation, and, maybe you could also use AI to defend against, sort of incoming litigation threats. I think in that, when you were talking about that, Sarah raised a point in the chat where she's saying, this sounds interesting, but she thinks that, AI adjudication is dangerous because, law evolves over time and isn't necessarily a computational process that favors correctness. And if you add randomness to permit evolving, then it's concerning because it would be unjust for anyone that gets a poor result. So I think, yeah, obviously auto adjudication has its problems. We've seen people in this group, talking about and presenting new projects on auto adjudication and sort of robo judges. But yeah, this law is not just pure computation, and that's kind of what our center is. Kind of, well, we promote computational law, which is all about automation of legal reasoning. It is not quite that simple in many regards, and that's been sort of an ongoing theme in our center. And yeah, I mean, Sarah's kind of qualifying it. Comp law can support by being sort of like human enhancing technology rather than replacing humans. I think that's a really good point too. So Kirk's asking.
I would.
Yeah, Sean,
Sorry,
go ahead.
I would just say we're certainly not advocating for robot judges. We're tracking the fact that there are companies building it, as you're seeing, right? And that there will be instances where it's deployed. That's really our point.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I would just add, I think a lot of it is, as you said, on compliance is something where this happens. A lot of it is about, okay, do we think this law is going to change? And I think one of the things we're focusing on is the context in which the law exists changing. So is societal expectations, are political dynamics changing? Are you seeing kind of different interpretations or statements about different interpretations, whether or not the law has changed or not? Because that humans are such a big part of this. And we sometimes think of it as giving lawyers and people who are kind of making these decisions about which strategies to take, which techniques to use, a kind of geopolitical analyst who's always there, who's helping them understand the context so that they can focus on kind of the application of the law and the interpretation of the law within a context that otherwise might be somewhat inaccessible because they're trained in the law, they're trained in the specific kind of legal cases and actions that have happened, and sometimes struggle to compile all the information around the other context, which is quite hard.
Great. Kirk is asking whether your service is jurisdiction based. For instance, tell me everything that's going on in Mexico on the legislative side, or if it's topic based, keep me up to date on AI regulations.
Yeah, it ultimately should be. It ultimately should be both, right? It's not, probably the most vexing part of the regulatory monitoring market is that there's no solution that actually covers the globe in a meaningful way for every sector, right? So any company that needs to keep up to date can't. There's no one-stop shop, no matter how much money many big companies have invested in doing it. It doesn't really exist. So, but I think at the higher level of abstraction, you can actually start to cover all the territories and start to tag them and assign them into topic areas where you can get kind of a meta-analysis of the topic area as well. So, ultimately what the system will be able to provide to you is what is important to you. And if what is important to you is tracking the topic rather than the region, then the system's going to understand that and show you this from a trend perspective or a topic perspective rather than a simple country perspective. And I would just say, the having been a human analyst and been deputy CEO at one of the most prominent geopolitical firms for a long time, like it is very hard to predict political events, right? We're not focused on prediction. What we're focused on here is capturing that things are changing and understanding the implications of it so you can react in real time. And that becomes a lot more achievable using the tools that we have today. And thus it's no longer it's no longer a crazy promise to say you could cover everywhere in the world because you're not actually trying to predict how thousands of actors in every place in the world are going to interact to create something tomorrow. You're saying these things are happening and we need to understand the implications today of it.
Got it. Yeah. Uh, Another question just came in. Is Hens starting to implement any of the EU AI Act?
I guess my question would be, what does implement mean in that context? Just so we understand what the
Like, are we
Well, I
abiding
guess
by it
it's
or are we tracking it?
well, I guess I mean, the EU AI Act is oh, somebody's gonna want that room. But I guess it's the law now in Europe, right? And it's more about uh, how do you what do you tell the companies that use your service about compliance, I guess, with
Yeah.
it.
I mean,
So,
my view on that, and Steve, you may want to chime in with a different view. My view is that this is very much down to risk tolerance for companies, right? Companies need to be aware and need to be able to track what's been written in the AI Act, which has this risk-based approach, and they need to make commercial decisions that align with their risk appetite. Someone shared with me a survey yesterday where 45% of American CEOs said they thought their business would be out of business if they didn't make dramatic technological changes in the next 5 years. And if you think about the uncertainty of something like the EU AI Act, where if you don't implement cutting edge technology, like half the CEOs in America think they would die, right? Versus if you do, you might get fined in the future. I think it's all about calibrating your risk appetite and realizing for different entities, the expectations of regulators will be different as well. For smaller entities, the expectation for your level of compliance would be different than if you're one of the biggest or if you're a platform, et cetera. So I
yeah.
think, and I think I see in the chat this comment about AI developers not being allowed to enter the EU market. A lot of this is about you're there and you're already there, and the question is whether you get enforced against at some point in the future as well.
Okay. I think, sorry, I may have misinterpreted Sarah's question. I think she was actually thinking about how do you yourself as a company comply with the EU AI Act, I guess, since you're processing data and using AI algorithms.
Steve, did you want or should I? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I feel like that's a longer answer with probably lots of legalese about
And
how
one
we
that's a little charged. So we
uh,
are recording this actually. So anyways, I'm sure you're complying with the law. And yeah, maybe just a word before we turn it over to Roberto. So how does your business model work? Do people get a subscription, um, or is it per instance? So how does it
Yeah.
how does your business model work?
Generally, we're viewing this product as available to individuals within organizations to start using for, for a price they can swipe on a credit card effectively. And as we build up a critical mass within the organization, they'll be able to unlock organizational capabilities as well. Of course, there are some major companies and organizations that have come to us to talk about doing really, really big things with them in this regard. And as a result, we would be looking at relationships like that. But I think, to me, one of the biggest values we can bring to the industry is that geopolitical risk analysis today is extremely expensive. It's big six-figure advisory contracts from lots of human analysts, and therefore it's off limits to nonprofits, it's off limits to universities, it's off limits to smaller companies. And we want to make that accessible using technology in line with that point about costs coming down.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a great vision, and it's a great example for yet another vertical that I had no idea about, and that was it seems like you could use computational methods to capture expertise of humans and make them democratize it, make it available to more players, and so it's a really great example. I'm not going to ask you for a prediction about what's going to happen after November 5th, because I'm sure everyone has his own predictive model there. But anyways, it was great to have you both, Sean and Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing the story of Hens. And you please keep us posted as you kind of go along and have your continued success. And so please check in with us on a regular basis. So thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. Well, it's a privilege
Yeah.
to speak to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe you could put your contact info in the chat, so if people have any follow-up questions, they could reach out to you directly. Thank you again. And we'll now turn it over to Roberto. He's right there. Okay, Roberto, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And so you're bringing AI to the Supreme Court of Justice in Mexico as a legal technologist, and you created the Sor Juana project, and we're excited to learn about that. So over to you.
Thank you.
And by the way,
yeah.
As I mentioned before, unfortunately, I have a hard stop now, but Megan will sort of continue from here. But thank you again, Roberto.
Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Dr. Bogle and Dr. Ma, of course, Dr. Lamley in the Stanford Law School. So I thought maybe we could start by a demo. Usually I start with a presentation and then we go with an explanation and but I thought maybe we could start with the demo. So I'll start sharing my screen. So this is the demo. This is a platform that we built, and to which Mexicans all across the country and all across the world can use to understand what the Supreme Court is doing. And you can you simply select a case, which you can filter by date or topic, and you can start asking. So in this case, we'll ask in English. So you can ask something like, what is this case about? And we'll start calculating, and we had an error because that happens, of course, during live presentations, but usually it fixes, and it says, this case is about the constitutionality of the Hidalgo State Penal Code that restricts abortion in cases of rape. The provision requires a woman to report the rape when she knows she's pregnant, and of the authorities to verify the crime before authorizing abortion. And it deals with the constitutionality of that process. And we can also, delete this one. You can choose another one, like, we have topics here and you can pick your own. So what's this case about? And it'll answer and say something like, okay, this is about a child with Down syndrome who was denied access to regular swimming classes at the sports center in Hidalgo, Mexico. It's a state. And the child's parents argued that the sports center decision to place their children in a separate adapted swimming pool was discriminatory and violated their rights. You can ask several more questions. We'll have a dedicated space for the demo. This is essentially how it works. And now we'll jump into our slides. Great. So today's topic will be building bridges and redefining access using redefining access to judicial information using AI, which is precisely what we do here. Of course, my opinions and ideas do not represent necessarily those of the Supreme Court or those of Justice Ana Margarita Rios Farhat. But before you go, if you have anything to do or something, this is the key takeaway. This is what I want you to take away from this presentation. You saw the demo, but this is sort of the takeaway. The implementation of AI in the judicial task can and should be steered towards social good by amplifying our capabilities, not necessarily replacing them. We're going to talk about amplification in a minute. Of course, let's start from the beginning. Let's start from the very beginning. Implementing AI in the judicial task is not a straightforward thing. As you can probably think, and you've seen, there's many different takes and many different pathways that you can follow. And so it's not a straightforward process. Its implementation should always be guided by central, strong core values of your organization, in our case, the Supreme Court. And for us, that value is transparency. It drives our efforts. It is our North Star, the value that we follow. And that's what drives our efforts towards implementing AI, our strong commitment to transparency. So by law, we are required to publish any and every case that involves constitutional matters. So basically, if there's any constitutional matters being discussed in this case, we have to publish a public version, a public draft of the resolution ahead of this discussion in the floor of the Supreme Court. And this is done by law for a couple of years now. So this is done previous to the case discussion. And of course, we protect parties' personal data, private data. And, we publish a public version that is protected. And we've been doing this for years now. But why? Why do this? We believe that transparency is key to democracy, and that trust in public institutions is also key to a healthy democracy. We can only have strong institutions when people back them and have trust in them. We can only build this trust by communicating to people in an effective manner what is it that we do, so that people know and understand the work that we do. And so for a long time, this has been tried to achieve. We've been trying to achieve this by publishing drafts of resolution, by publishing these public versions that I was talking about. And, we've implemented smart summaries and, frequent questions and answers during the document. So, the document isn't very hard to navigate. Also, I must mention that Supreme Court resolutions in Mexico are way longer than they are in the US. So in the US, they tend to be pretty short, a couple pages for the ones that I've read. But in Mexico, they tend to be, upwards of 100, 200 pages. So it's almost like a book. So we've added summaries and everything, but, there was still a huge gap between the institution and people. There was a huge gap because there was an assumption and that people would go out to read the documents and that they will, read the summaries and everything. And maybe some of them they do, but it'll be mainly lawyers and other legal professionals. You're not getting really to, the society as a whole. So there was still a huge gap. That's why we decided to take our commitment with transparency to the next level. And we said, we have to take it a step forward. We have to build bridges to connect people and connect society to the work that we do, to the work that is ultimately their institution. So that's why we decided to introduce Sor Juana. I know Sor Juana is perhaps a mouthful name for English speakers, but it's named after a Mexican feminist hero, a poet and a visionary, and which is today revived through an AI platform. So this is basically under the premise that stories are engaging. If you know the stories, if you know what happened, if you know how it got to the Supreme Court, what was decided, why this was decided this way, how can it affect me and my rights? The story is engaging, but legalese isn't. So a huge document is not engaging at all. And so this is why we decided to explain the Supreme Court rulings in relatable terms using AI. Of course, this is what I already showed you a little bit of the demo, but this is what it looks like. And well, people can explore different resolutions. They can filter them by date. They can filter them by topic, by type as well. And they can choose to question matters that are yet to be voted on or matters that have been voted in the past in previous sessions. And they can also, there's a small like flashcard with what happens to your data. So if you're a user, you can read that flashcard right away. It's right there. And, we don't collect any of your personal data, how we process data, why do we process data. It's only to make our models better. And we only process, what was the question you gave us and what was the answer we provided. And, what was the selection of your preferences. But we don't process any particular personal data. And so there's, of course, a clear breakdown there. It is important also to note that the platform currently only carries resolutions from Supreme Court Justice Ana Margarita Rios Farhat, which is one of 11 Supreme Court justices in Mexico. And well, this is because her leadership has been key. I work in her team. And well, she has also extended the invitation for other Supreme Court justices to participate and to provide us with their cases, and we will publish them in this way. That hasn't happened yet, but we're crossing our fingers that will be the case in the near future. So by the numbers, we've been 3 months ever since the last days of June, 3 months. We've had 6,000 unique users. These are unique IPs that we don't track. And also we don't count if people like re-enter. So it's 6,000 unique users. And we've answered more than 10,000 questions during these 3 months. So we believe this is unheard of for a judicial tool that your government released. So there's a huge, cult following and interest in knowing what the Supreme Court does and to know it in a way that it's familiar and relatable and simple. Okay, so this is time for our live demo. I've, of course, shown you pretty much a small portion of the demo. But basically, you can filter here by type. These are resolutions that are yet to be voted on. So we call them public versions. And you can also filter by documents or cases that have been voted in the past. And so you can pick one from the past and you can pick one by topic. So we have economic and social rights, women's rights, violations to human rights, child and family relations, migration. So you can choose any of these topics. We add more each week. And well, you can choose like, say this one. And the model is intended to be explored for a Spanish-speaking person, but thankfully you can also ask questions in English. So what's this case about? And it'll process and says, okay, this case revolves around the right to a legal counsel for a child victim of a crime in a criminal procedure. The case involves a 12-year-old boy who was a victim of kidnapping, and the Supreme Court reviewed the case to determine if the child's right to legal counsel was properly protected. You can say something like, okay, well, explain it to me. This is a question that we always like to do. Explain to me like a 10-year-old or to my 10-year-old son. And say, okay, imagine a 12-year-old boy who was kidnapped. He was scared and alone, and he needed someone to help him. The Supreme Court in Mexico looked at this and looked at this case and make sure that the boy had a good lawyer to help him. The Supreme Court decided that the boy's lawyer didn't do a good job of protecting him, and that's not fair. The Supreme Court said that when a child is a victim of a crime, they need a special kind of lawyer who will fight hard for them and make sure that they are safe. It's like having a superhero lawyer who knows how to help kids in tough situations. So this is pretty much, a couple minutes. We already know what this case is about. Essentially, we can ask more questions. Like, for example, were any precedents voted or used? And this is something that will be perhaps more helpful for a legal professional or legal scholar. So which precedents or cases were used. If there weren't any, we can also pass to another one. Okay, but here it gives you some of the precedents that were used during the case. So we have another, a couple of other cases, and it explains to you that, the first one says this case deals with the scope of human right to adequate defense. The second one examines the right to legal counsel for victims in crimes. The third one, you can go so far as you wish. But this is an example of how it can be helpful for both people who aren't in the legal system, children, people, general society, but it also can be helpful for legal professionals, judges, people who are involved in the process. So yeah, maybe I'll take it up for questions. Let me see if you have any in the chat.
Thank you so much, Roberto. This is so exciting. And I think in particular, knowing that the Supreme Court of Mexico is kind of behind the initiative. So we really appreciate you sharing this. I know that the chat is already flooding with questions. And so I will just kind of start with the first one. This one is a little bit more of a technical question. They were asking what were the inputs that were involved in operating Sor Juana. I don't know if you would want to share a little bit about that, and I guess the construction of it.
Awesome. Yeah. So basically, oh, sorry. Actually, to answer that question, I'll use one of my slides, which I forgot, but I'll share that now. So this is how our pipeline looks like. So basically, it all starts with our legal team. They are the ones doing the heavy lifting here. They solve and they basically, they solve these very important constitutional matters, these cases, and they produce, basically after each case, they produce the entire resolution, which is a document, very legal, very technical, which is about 100 pages, 200 pages more in length. And then we use data protection. So we make sure that everyone's data is protected, no names, no amounts of, for example, settlements, no names for companies, names for number of file and things like that. And so we do a work of data protection, which is currently being done manually by human intervention. And then we use a common algorithm, which perhaps you already know, which is retrieval augmented generation. We basically pass that document into vectors, and then we basically feed them to an AI model in the order of importance that they are, according to the question that you made. So if you make a question which is related to precedents, I will perhaps give more importance to those portions of the text which talk about precedents, and the model we use it to produce an answer. Then we use human supervision. After we made the retrieval augmented generation, we use a team of human supervision, which is the legal team that produced the resolution, to verify that the answers are being well answered, basically correctly, that it's not hallucinating in any way. And after we have their feedback, we use reinforcement learning through human feedback in the process, and we make sure that we basically polish any edge cases that we might have, and make sure that the answers are being answered correctly. Many times it's not so much that it answers incorrectly, it's much more like it leaves some data that it's important aside, that the model sort of like doesn't think it's very important to mention, but it's to the human team, it is very important. So we then use reinforcement learning to shape that. We wrap it all up in a bow using prompt engineering, and then we ship it to people. It is absolutely free. Everyone can use it. Everyone in Mexico has started to use it. And yeah, it's absolutely free. We pay the bill for that. So talking about that, also some of the challenges that we have faced is scale. How do you scale something to be used for many people? So in terms of tokens, in terms of tokens per minute, in terms of a platform that can host many people at a time, and how you do that, with the cost being as low as possible. Free is better. And we've done that with incredible partners such as Trimlit, Google, and of course, misuses and reliability are challenges across the board. So you have to take in consideration that some people might misuse it, and also make sure that the system is reliable. And we do that through our LHF. And so, yeah, I don't know if somebody else has any questions.
No, that's absolutely wonderful. So I think one of the features that you showed us earlier was that you're actually able to take a look at some of the precedents that were cited in the cases. And so one of the questions in the chat by Daniel, he also wanted to ask kind of whether or not the tool can identify other related cases, or if it can provide an outline of the black letter law from these cases. Do you create anything beyond just citing precedents? Is there a possibility to see the network of documents, for example?
Yeah, so currently we are working with one single document at a time, and we do that very, very intentionally, because we want to make sure that the model responds, in a way that it's incredibly reliable. And so that involves, providing as much context as possible, but as specific as possible to this specific case. And so currently we don't connect it with other documents, but those are plans that we have for the future. That's definitely something that we want to build, something that, perhaps you arrive there not knowing exactly what case you want to visit or what topic or what, date, but you describe, you have a problem, right? So you describe your problem. It could be a legal problem or a legal question, or maybe you're just curious, and you can have like not one, but many cases at a time that you're, consulting. So that is definitely the future. But for now, as we, build this technology out and we build reliability and we, build the system and the infrastructure, we are basically focused on making it as focused as possible, so it can be as reliable as possible.
Well, so you mentioned about, I guess, next steps or the next stages. So I'm curious actually where you see this going. I know right now you mentioned your partnerships with Streamlit and Google, and the app seems to be, or the platform seems to be housed on Streamlit. Do you have intentions to deploy it kind of, I know you mentioned a couple of scaling questions, but do you intend to integrate it with, I guess, the Supreme Court's official website, or finding new ways for the tool to engage with more people?
Yeah, sure. So basically, if you go today to the Supreme Court website, which we can go right now if you want. Let me see, Supreme Court. We have here I'm writing in English, that's why it's there you go, Spanish. So basically, you go here to Pleno en Salas, to the first chamber, Justice Ana María Torres Farhat, and here you have a button that takes you directly to Sor Juana. So that's as much implementation that has been done, in terms of the official website. But that's only because, this is a strategy and a project that it's under the Office of Justice Ana Margarita Reyes Farhat. This was her vision and her innovation. So we basically build that out. But as we build more confidence, more trust, and people use more, we hope to have perhaps maybe one day build out a specific dedicated website that is, much more, I'd say, resilient and broader. But definitely for now, it's kind of there. We have a lot of support from Streamlit, and that's pretty cool, because they give us a lot of resources. So shout out to them, and that's pretty cool.
I noticed in the chat that there's also another question about whether other countries are using something like this. I don't know if there are other countries that have reached out to you, knowing this resource, and were inspired and kind of asked if they can implement some way.
Yeah, so for now, we haven't heard about any other jurisdictions or countries using a tool like this. We've only recently started to share it with people, internationally. We have had interest from Germany and from the US about how it works, and share some of the work in there. We've had people from SCOTUS reach out, and that's pretty helpful. So, we're open to share everything that we've learned, and a lot of how the implementation came about, and we hope to see more tools like this, that can amplify the work being done and amplify it to people. So that's the main goal, not necessarily replacing, but amplifying and helping to understand cases, but for both for lawyers, but also for general public. And I think that's sort of the road ahead.
Wonderful. I'm also curious about sort of the feedback part in your pipeline. I know you mentioned there's human feedback. I presume it's some of the government lawyers or the folks that work with the Supreme Court. Do judges get involved in that feedback? And then on the other side, do you take feedback from the users themselves that actually have engaged with the system and make updates in that regard?
Correct. So very interesting question. So we use human feedback. We do reinforcement learning through human feedback, and the way we do that is that the same team who solved the case, who drafted the resolution, who made all of the judging decisions, they are the ones testing the system. We put a lot of stress maybe in them because we tell them, take the system to the maximum, take it to an edge case. But once they do, they give us that feedback, and we basically we train the model to answer more in one way or another, or we give more importance to one set of data over another, and that way we shape sort of the answers, and we shape the entire reliability part. In terms of the human feedback from users, we do collect all that data, but sometimes it can be a little hard to discern which data it's good data that you want to train on, and which data it's kind of the data that you maybe don't want to train on. So it can be hard to discern. In the beginning, we started to collect the data, and the plan is to use it later for training and sub-training another model to use basically a sub-trained LLM. But today we just collect it, and we are using it to sort of know what is the behavior that people have been taking with this tool, and some of the inputs that we can learn from that. But yeah, it's pretty much we have to be sort of careful to train on data coming from users, because all sorts of misuses that we saw at the beginning could be filtering through to the training process. So we have to be careful of that. But so far we collect it, and we plan to discern it and train over the good data that we can collect.
Fantastic. And I guess maybe as a last question, I mean, there's been some concerns, obviously, from lawyers related to the black box that's, I guess, inherent to generative AI and kind of technology of this nature. And I'm sure working with, Supreme Court community, as well as legal professionals in general, hasn't been the easiest, particularly about their concerns. And so I was wondering how you and your team have kind of managed some of these concerns or some of these challenges, and possibly if you had any pushback and how you dealt with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, starting out is always difficult, and especially with some new technology that you're going to ship to people. And black boxes is a big issue because you don't necessarily know what the models are being trained on, how they're being trained, if they have any biases, and how you're going to deal with those biases. However, we do a lot of work, and we've done a lot of work, on training and prompt engineering the whole system in a way that it can be also quite useful. The term here is useful. We want it to be useful and beneficial. And so we've done a lot of training, a lot of testing has been done for over a year now. We released 3 months ago, but this started about a year ago. And that's sort of like our way to deal with that black box question. There's always pushback from all around. There's always gonna be, if you're gonna push something to the next level. But some of it's very positive, because you learn about the concerns that other people have within your organization or in external organizations, and some of that feedback we have taken to heart, and we have implemented ways to deal with that. And so basically we have sort of like re-question the way we train, the way we process data, the way also we sort of like train our responses to deal both with the black box question to make sure that there's nothing, there's no bias being also put into the actual answer, and also to implement sort of like these blocking any potential misuses that people may want to exploit. So that's basically some of the work that we've done in that regard.
Well, I think we are just about at time. It's clear that there are lots of questions still rolling in, so it's clearly demonstrating just how incredible the work that you and your team have started here and are doing with the Supreme Court in Mexico. So we hope that you've already jumped the gun to this, but appreciate you kind of leaving your contact. Just want to thank not only everyone for joining, but also to our special speakers today. So a round of applause to Roberto, Steve, and Sean. And stay tuned for our next time. We'll see you all very soon. So thank you again. Right.